Okay. So I don't remember exactly how far we got yesterday. I think we started getting into a handful. Sorry.
Teachers, students, everyone at this time should be in their regular fifth period class. Everyone at this time should be in their regular fifth period class. We are about to turn the bells back on and we will be on regular schedule the rest of the day. Everyone should be in their fifth period class and we will turn the bells back on and we will be on regular bell schedule the rest of today. Thank you.
Okay. So I think we started, I think this is where we're at, that we should be here. I think we started getting into some of the actual legislation that comes out of the civil rights movement. I know we talked about the 14th Amendment already as being sort of paramount to civil rights because the 14th Amendment has the Equal Protection Clause, right? But we're going to pass a number of different provisions or a number of different pieces of legislation aimed at trying to rectify issues with civil rights as well. Okay? I mean, look, you should probably be aware of the vague general idea of when the date is, right? Which is to say that this is occurring in the 1960s and it's occurring under the Johnson administration. Hopefully you know that from a U.S. history class, right? Ideally, I would like for you to know that from a U.S. history class. That it was the Johnson administration that had initiated much of this work, right? Aimed at desegregating schools. But most importantly, what I really want you to understand is that these federal civil rights acts, and they're federal, meaning that they come from the national government is dictating sort of a top-down approach. It allows the national government to come in and take over things that are happening in the individual states, right? So you have the Voting Rights Act of 65, for instance. And the Voting Rights Act of 65 is a piece of legislation that allows the national government to come in and supersede election policy or election rules in states that have histories of discriminatory policy. And it's important for you to understand that, because that will become an issue later on, because we have now rolled back protections. Okay? And this is one of those concepts where it gets really tricky, because I'm going to be honest with you, the Supreme Court is probably correct in having rolled them back, because logically you kind of have to, even though it's also illogical. Right? The Voting Rights Act of 65 says the federal government can only take over voting in states that have histories of discrimination, yes? So that means the national government has been controlling it for a number of years. Therefore, there is no longer a history of discrimination. Therefore, the national government can no longer control it. Right? But that's. I mean, you realize on some level that's like spraying pesticide around my house because I have roaches, and then I don't have roaches anymore, so I stop spraying pesticide around my house. Right? What's likely to happen? Yeah, I would think so. We'll see. We'll see what happens. Okay. There are civil rights issues that do occur outside of the South. So I want you to understand that the South in and of itself is not the only area of the country with civil rights issues. Okay. One of the terms that you need to be aware of is redlining. And again, this is wildly complex because it's discriminatory and non-discriminatory at the same time, right? It really comes down to sort of how you're looking at things and how you're logically explaining something. So essentially the concept of redlining would be this, right? If you were to take, and we're going to use New York City as an example, because if you've never been to New York is actually intellectually designed, right? Which means that New York is gridded, yes? You know what that means? Like you have streets that run this way and streets that run this way. Okay? Redlining is the concept of basically utilizing math and demographic. I want you to understand there's actual logical thought behind this. People don't just arbitrarily be like, no. They're using actual data to determine which areas are suited to receive loans. You understand what I'm saying? So redlining is really about like mortgages and the opportunity at like home ownership and growth and things like that. And so you might have a situation like this where this area is redlined. Okay? That means that if you live inside this area, you are not going to be able to get a loan. Which is discriminatory. I mean, it is. Like, there's no doubt. Like, you can't tell me it's not discriminatory. Okay? It's not necessarily racially discriminatory, right? Because if you're a white person and you live in that neighborhood, you ain't getting a loan either. You understand white people don't really live here, though, right? And because that goes back to that concept of de jure versus de facto segregation that we got to at the very end of the period yesterday, right? What is de facto segregation? It's basically segregation by choice. Do we segregate ourselves today? Yes. Oh God, yes. Go to any major city in the United States, and can you find like a neighborhood called Little Italy that's all Italians?
No.
Yeah. Can you find a Chinatown?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you find a, I mean, look, man, one of my really good friends is from Hell's Kitchen in New York City, which is an Irish neighborhood, right? And he told me a story once in which, like, a white dude moved into the neighborhood, but he wasn't Irish. You can't really kick him out, but he was like, we did ask him like 10 or 12 times, like they asked him a lot, like, why do you want to live here? Like, why do you, like, you're not Irish, why do you want to live in this neighborhood? Like, and that's, I mean, he didn't tell me the dude was like Italian or English or whatever, he was not Irish, but he was white. So, de facto segregation absolutely continues to occur in society today. Okay, and that's a complex issue as well because there's a part of me that would tell you, I mean, people should be allowed to choose wherever they want to live, and that there's really nothing with choosing to live with people who share similar like cultures and values, right? Like I don't know if y'all realize this because we're what are we calling this? Like suburban or like fringe rural? Like y'all realize we're not in a big city, yes?
Yeah.
I mean we're close to one. We're not in a big city, right? But y'all realize that if you go to like, I forget the name of the neighborhood. Y'all know there's a neighborhood outside of Detroit, Michigan, in which all of the street signs are in Arabic. Arabic. Like public street signs are in Arabic. Why? It's an Arab neighborhood, right? If you go to Chinatown in San Francisco, right, the street signs are in Chinese, right? Like these are government-funded. I mean, like it's a street sign. Like the government pays for that, and they're putting it in languages other than English. And if you are an immigrant, I mean, look, man, I'm gonna be honest with you. If I decide later on in my life I'm gonna go retire down in Costa Rica, right? And I speak a little bit of Spanish. It's not good Spanish, but I speak a little bit of Spanish, right? Would I go live in like an expat, like a ex-American community? I might, right? Make life a little bit easier for me on some level, okay? Because at least then, like, I can communicate easier, right? But y'all realize, have y'all ever, like, you know that neighborhoods like that generally have their own, like, stores and markets, yes? You understand, you go into like a supermarket in Chinatown in San Francisco, you buy different stuff than you go into like an H-E-B. Yeah? Right? And a large part of that is actually because, I mean, obviously the stuff that you're making food with is very different. Right? So you're capable of finding things that are traditional ingredients and traditional dishes in areas where that tradition still matters. Right? And I don't think, again, just personal opinion, you can disagree with me if you want. I don't think there's anything wrong with a Chinese immigrant or an Italian immigrant or whomever coming to the United States and deciding that as they learn a new way of life and they completely, change everything, that being around people with similar backgrounds and at least, you know, similar cultures to where you don't have to change everything. You can still have like the foods that you grew up on that might be a comfort to you. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, right? But that can lead to some negative issues when you look, especially now in this day and age, because y'all realize how much like data exists in the world in this day and age, because y'all put everything online. I mean, I say y'all, but like my generation does too. Everybody does, right? Like all that information that goes online is compiled and like sifted through, and I mean, people can target ads down to the block, knowing whether like this is a Republican block, this is a Democratic block in New York City, right? All right, so just understand that, right? That's the idea of redlining, which does matter. Okay, already sort of went over this yesterday. We're going to desegregate schools because we need to. This is important, and try to remind me, if I have time tomorrow, and hopefully I will, I'd like to show you a short little clip from the 2020 presidential Democratic primary debates about Kamala Harris, because Kamala Harris brought this very issue up, right? So Kamala Harris was a kid in, I believe it was Oakland. She was living in California. I forget exactly where. I think she was living in Oakland. And made reference to this. So in the 1970s, as a active attempt to end segregation, right? Not just end like de jure segregation, like segregation by law, but trying to end de facto segregation, right? You had governments that would start essentially taking kids out of like the black neighborhood in North Carolina, and the Supreme Court case that ultimately like deals with all of this is Swan versus Mecklenburg County. Right, Mecklenburg is where Charlotte, North Carolina is, right? So Mecklenburg County schools, they were basically putting children on buses and busing them like all the way over to the other side of town in order to artificially create diversity in schools. Okay? And I need you to understand, that's not, look, diversity in schools is a good thing. Okay? Specifically diversity in thought. Right? Which one of the ways you achieve diversity in thought is by a diversity of experience. Right? If you take everybody in this exact same little tiny neighborhood who's all dealt with the exact same little tiny issues all their lives, they don't really have very different experiences, which limits an educational opportunity. Alright? As far as discrimination in employment goes, again, we've got the Civil Rights Act can't discriminate based off of race, gender, religion, things of that nature. Now, there are some questions as to whether or not gender ideology, or sexual orientation, or things like that are included in there, because they're actually not. I mean, they're not in the verbiage, right? Frequently, courts have decided that would get counted in as well, though. Yes, right? That we have sort of this concept, you know, when we say like constitutionally you have the right, you know, the Congress has the power to maintain an army and a navy. They therefore have the power to maintain an air force, right? If we're going to end discrimination based upon gender and race and things like that, you know, sexual orientation, which if you're unaware, in the 1970s wasn't at the forefront of society, right? Like the first sort of riot in American history as it pertained to gay rights wasn't until the Stonewall riot in 1969 in New York City, right? Prior to that, you don't have that concept, right? We're going to create the Equal Opportunity Commission. I don't care about a whole bunch of this. I really don't. What I do need you to understand, though, is that as it goes through with this, it's wildly complex and difficult to sometimes understand what does and does not count as discrimination, right? And how do you prove whether discriminatory behavior actually occurred, right? Because if I go in and apply for a job and I don't get the job, right, and let's just say a woman of color does get the job, could I claim discrimination? really, let's actually take it and say vice versa, right? Because maybe being a white dude, I did get like an advantage there, right? And honestly, probably didn't take race into it. Like y'all understand, men are hired at a significantly higher rate than women because employers just naturally assume that women will take time off for like getting pregnant and having a baby and things like that. Yeah. Okay. So who has to make? All right. Have we used this term before? Do we know what burden of proof means? No. Okay. So here's the thing. If I claim, we're just going to use ridiculous scenarios here, right? Let's say I claim that Kevin cheated on the last test. Yes?
Yeah.
Do I need to prove that he cheated, or does he need to prove that he didn't?
You need to prove that it's true.
That's the burden of proof. Do we understand? Now, criminally in the United States, hopefully you realize that from a criminal perspective in the United States, we have the concept of innocent until proven guilty. Yes? Right? So if I were to just call the police right now and be like, Caven beat me up in class, right? Where does the burden of proof lie? Actually, not on me because I'm not suing, right? But it would rely upon the police. Like the police, the state would have to make their case and show evidence that he absolutely did assault me, right? If they cannot find that evidence, then Caven goes free and he doesn't really even have to defend himself because the burden of proof falls on the state, right? Now, civil cases are obviously different. You understand that? Because civil cases are not criminal in nature, right? So now you have basically a plaintiff and a respondee, right, or a respondent. And in that case, where does the burden of proof lie? If I file a equal opportunity discrimination claim, right, do I have to prove that I was discriminated against, or does the company have to prove that they didn't discriminate? No, it would be me, right? It would be me, because if the company were, if the default position was that the company discriminated, that would have terribly negative repercussions for, like, the economy. Nobody would hire anybody, right? Because at that point, if the default position is that I'm discriminating, then why would I engage in any behavior? Because then at that point, literally, all that somebody would have to do is claim that it's discrimination and I'm screwed. Because this is, just so you understand, this is actually one of those things. You understand how hard it is to prove whether or not something is or isn't discriminatory in nature? Right? Because if you're unaware, like this is a thing that shows up in college admissions all the time, right? Like that's real world for y'all. Because y'all are in the process of applying for college, yes? Okay? So let's just say for the sake of argument, you don't get into A&M. Oh, your life is over. Right? Okay? How do you know whether or not the reason you didn't get in was discriminatory? You really don't. And it's almost impossible. It's almost impossible for you to prove sort of one way or the other. You understand? Because the reality is, let's just, again, I'm going to keep picking on Caven today. Let's say Caven and I are both seniors, right? And we have the same grades, the same GPA, right, and everything. And we both apply. He gets in, I don't get in. Right? How can I prove that it's discriminatory? I really can't. There's so many different factors that go into a decision like that you're not going to ever have any two candidates that are exactly the same. Yes? Because our extracurriculars will be different, our backgrounds will be different. All sorts of minute details will vary. So how do you determine which of those tiny, minute details made the difference in who got in and who didn't get in and who got waitlisted? It's nearly impossible to figure out. Okay? So just understand that. The Voting Rights Act you need to understand, right? Because the Voting Rights Act is going to get rid of things like literacy tests. We're actually going to pass a constitutional amendment, the 24th Amendment, which abolishes the poll tax, right? A poll tax is literally exactly what it sounds like. You had to pay to vote, right? Do you have to pay to vote today? So who's registered to vote? Who did I already register to vote? Somebody in here? You gone and voted yet?
Not yet.
Because you know you can go vote in the gym like right now. I find that comical, right? But I actually find that really comical. What happens if you're like a sex offender? You're not allowed to step foot on campus. not get to vote now? I mean, let's not let them on campus. I'm totally okay with that. No, I mean, here's the thing. Fort Bend County, if you don't know, Fort Bend County, you basically go vote anywhere. Like, honestly, probably tomorrow morning, I'll probably go down there and early vote. Even though I don't live anywhere close to here. Right? So no, they would be able to go vote elsewhere. But, what do you need to do when you go vote? What do you have to show them? Your ID. You have to show them your driver's license. Did you pay for your driver's license?
Yes.
So did you pay to vote? Not exactly. How am I going to say that? Because you can show up with your voter registration card as a form of ID. No. Blair, did you get your voter registration card?
Yes, I did.
You know where it is? Yeah, see? She can show up and vote with that. Right? And that's actually good enough. Okay? In fact, actually, if you don't have that, you can even vote, like, fill out what's called a provisional ballot. Right? And then basically, you can vote, and if your vote might matter, then they'll count it. And when I say, y'all understand what I mean when I say that? So let's just say for the sake of argument, like we have Steve and Mike running for some job, right? And Steve gets 10,000 votes and Mike gets 1,000 votes, and there's 200 provisional ballots. Are they counting those 200 ballots? No, because it can't sway the outcome of the election. They're not going to do the work to verify whether or not those are or are not legal ballots. It doesn't matter, right? We talked about gerrymandering already, haven't we? Yes? Have we gerrymandered in here yet?
Yes.
We did it? Like I had you actually gerrymandered?
No, but we already went over it.
Oh, no, all right. At some point in time, I want y'all to actually gerrymander. It's fun. I love gerrymandering. Why not? Okay. I will tell you this, that just so you understand, that's creating all sorts of problems in terms of voter participation in this day and age. But I can probably skip that since we went over it. Be aware that obviously you can vote by mail. Actually, do you know that you could always vote by mail even before COVID-19? Right? When I was on active duty in the Marine Corps, that's how I had to vote because I was stationed well outside of West Virginia. Right? But my home of record is where I still vote. Bye guys!